Welcome to the Exam Room Podcast, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hello, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thank you so very much for watching and downloading in more than 150 countries around the world and making the Exam Room one of the most consumed nutrition podcasts anywhere on the planet today. And oh my goodness gracious, do we have a scrum-diddly-umptious story to tell today. My guest is someone who is a plant-based chef, a holistic nutritionist, but that is about the furthest thing, perhaps, that she ever thought she'd be doing from her original career as a pharmacist. With that, we welcome two-time author, friend of the show now, Ashley Madden, to the Exam Room. Ashley, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I don't think that we have ever had anyone here on the show who can check those three boxes: chef, nutritionist, and pharmacist. That is quite the eclectic collection of careers you have.
It is. While I was going through that, I thought the same thing. Like, I'm really gathering some acronyms here. But it all worked out. It all works together.
It is. By the way, before we get rolling and talk about your story, which is just absolutely incredible, you have a new book coming out. This is the original right here, the Plant-Based Cookbook. So easy to remember title, but Plant-Based Delicious drops on June 13th. And there's a particular recipe in that book that I definitely want to ask you about here today. But before we get into that, before we get into the deliciousness, let's delve into the deliciousness that is your super inspiring story.
Wow.
At the age of 23, you were blindsided with the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. What was leading up to that?
Yeah, that's right. So that was a really difficult time in my life, and you nailed it. I was blindsided. As you mentioned, I used to be a pharmacist. I was actually doing my hospital residency, and I had some random symptoms, and I just went to a walk-in clinic, and they were like, "We think you need an MRI." And out of nowhere, a doctor I didn't know came and gave me the report, and he was like, turns out you have multiple sclerosis. And I was floored. And that was the beginning of my life taking on a completely different trajectory than I had ever expected.
Had you been healthy up until you started to experience those symptoms?
Yeah.
You're so young.
Yes, I was. As I say in my first book, The Plant-Based Cookbook, I considered myself healthy-ish. In retrospect, I say healthy-ish. I exercised. I thought I ate well. I didn't have any preliminary signs of any kind of chronic disease. I did have a family history. I did have an aunt who had MS, and as you probably know from my first cookbook, after I was diagnosed with MS, my sister was as well. So we have the genetic predisposition. We live in Canada with, low vitamin D levels, and we were probably exposed to some virus as young women. And, those three things come together. So it turned out I had MS. My symptoms leading up to my MRI actually weren't related to the diagnosis, which is interesting. I was a runner and I had back pain, and that's what garnered the MRI. And turns out the back pain was totally unrelated to MS. It was something that I had to go to physiotherapy for, but kind of as an aside, what they discovered with the MRI was that, you actually have lesions on your brain. So after the MRI, they did a spinal tap, they did a follow-up MRI, and they said, yeah, you have MS. We've caught it because of these other things. But had you not come for this particular reason, who knows what would have happened before we had discovered it.
And at 23, I think I may have undersold it when I said blindsided. And you go in there for back pain and you walk out with a diagnosis for MS. And even though it had run in your family, it sounds like you physically were taking fairly good care of yourself as a runner. Were you worried that this could happen to you?
No, no, no. Furthest thing from my mind. And it was such a shock. I cycled through the stages of grief. I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know what to do next. I went into a depression for sure for a few years because the doctors essentially said to me, take your medication, live your life. But yes, MS is this type of condition. For your listeners who aren't aware, it's an autoimmune disease where your brain is attacked. And depending on which part of your brain is attacked, it can affect different parts of your body. So MS can have symptoms, physical symptoms, sensory symptoms. It can affect everything. So what I like to say is that what it instilled in me was fear. And so that was really hard to process at that young age, at that period in my life. I felt like joy was taken away from me. I felt like I had to contemplate everything all of a sudden.
So you say at that point you were healthy-ish. We'll put the
Yeah.
quotes there.
Yeah.
What was your diet like at that point?
To be totally honest with you, my diet, wow, it consisted of frozen low calorie dinners. It consisted of like powdered protein breakfast shakes. It consisted of like 100-calorie snack bars. It had dairy, meat. I thought I had to have, if I wanted a salad, I thought I had to have chicken in it. So, I got chicken in that. I used low calorie salad dressings, I really had no understanding of, what nutrient density meant and calorie density meant, or what foods were anti-inflammatory and how other foods could contribute to inflammation. And with the MS diagnosis, I would say that's kind of the first revelation to me, that I had this disease that was based in inflammation. And I started to read and learn about food and its relation to inflammation. And that was kind of the thing that got me going.
And I mean, you mentioned the low vitamin D levels and only being healthy-ish. I mean, if we were to look at your diagnosis kind of as a pie, I'm curious how big of a slice do you think diet would play here? Because you've got the vitamin D, you've got genetics, diet, obviously. How big of a slice do you think food would get?
That's really hard to say. I think even experts wouldn't be able to put a ratio on that. I mean, I think a lot of experts would say that it had nothing to do with it. I think for me, probably stress had a lot to do with my diagnosis. I was living a very stressful life in my residency, trying to do a lot of different things. It was my first time moving away from home. So I moved out of the province that I lived in Canada. And I'd always been, like a type A personality, just trying to do it all. So in terms of diet, I'm not sure how much it had an effect. I can't say that for sure to your listeners, but I mean, I can tell you, and I'm sure we'll get to it, I can tell you how much it changed after I changed my diet, how I felt, my symptoms, everything.
Absolutely, we're going to get to it.
Yeah.
But before we do, you're in residency, obviously training to become a pharmacist. You've got this medical background. What had your training taught you at that point as far as the challenges you would be facing?
When I heard the diagnosis, it was like I immediately saw a wheelchair in my future, to be totally honest. I remember the series of lectures when I was in university about MS, about autoimmune diseases, and about this one in particular, and how the effects could just be devastating, So after I was diagnosed, I thought, okay, because of what I know from school, then I have no choice but to accept disability in my future. That's essentially what I thought. And so the diagnosis was hard on me and really hard on my family because we all thought that. So
I would imagine so.
yeah.
And I mean, what is the typical, regimen of medication for somebody who's received this diagnosis?
Injectable medications that can help to alter your immune system to decrease the episodes, which is when you have a flare up of symptoms in MS because there's inflammation in your brain and some of the brain tissue is being attacked by your immune system. So these medications are, heavy duty medications. Immunomodulators would be what they're called. And I did go on medication. I was on medication for 7 years. It was an intramuscular injection that I had to take every week, and the side effects were awful. The side effects were so bad that that's why I came off them. So between me and my neurologist, I had been symptom free for a very long time. And the side effects were becoming worse than how I felt about the benefit. So I had stopped. But that's essentially what the plan is once you get diagnosed: medication, and then let's hope for the best.
And when did you start to go down the old plant-based rabbit hole? What was the epiphany there?
Mm,
You know, you mentioned inflammation earlier. Obviously, that ties so tightly to diet. So when did you start to discover all of this is
yeah.
kind of interwoven?
I would say it was a few years after my diagnosis, maybe 3 years, maybe even four, before I came out of like a depressive funk that I was in. I felt I kind of wavered between being hopeful and depressed. And when I kind of accepted that I had this condition and that I couldn't predict the future, that's when I got clearer. And as a pharmacist and as a student of academia, I thought, okay, what is the evidence out there? Because at this point, I had always been in love with food and cooking, and I would call myself a foodie then and today. And so I just started like gentle Googling, I will say. And then that led me into like actually looking into research papers and trying to find out information for myself as a pharmacist. Like what are we looking at here? Maybe I should be doing higher doses of vitamin D. Maybe I should be eliminating dairy. I didn't know there was a connection between dairy and inflammation. Maybe I should reduce red meat. Maybe I should be thinking about the oils. And so and it kind of had a domino effect. It started very slowly. And you have to remember too, Chuck, back then, there wasn't this, explosion of information that we have today about anti-inflammatory eating. It was very niche. I had to dig really deep and find some sources that probably weren't so popular, but that's what led me down that path. And I don't want to jump ahead of my story, but I went plant-based overnight. One day I said, and I know that that's not how a lot of people will benefit from doing it, but for me, it's like I had this, like just this kind of aha moment where I was like, oh my God, this is obvious. I know exactly what I have to do. And my motivation was so strong. It was my entire health, my well-being, my mobility that I decided the next morning, I said, that's it. That's it. I'm plant-based today. I'm plant-based. I will figure it out as I go.
It's interesting that you are able to make that leap, especially with the pharmacist background, because I would think as a pharmacist, you're so used to just filling prescriptions and here's another medication for this, and this is the course of treatment for everything. And you were able to see outside that box a little bit and start looking at that holistic approach. Was that difficult at all for you to make that leap?
No, it wasn't difficult because of my personality, but I also have to kind of support my good pharmacists out there because there's so many. We learn about the medications, but we also learn about the interventions that can be done before medications, especially when we're talking about heart disease, cholesterol, blood pressure, obesity, diabetes. There's a lot of, we call them lifestyle interventions, which they're still well known as. Not so much with autoimmune disease. So I was going down what seemed to be a bit of a rogue path. But when I made these changes and I had told people what I was doing and was feeling better, and after 5 years I was feeling even better and hadn't progressed at all, people really started to ask serious questions about what I was doing.
Quick point here that I want to point out. I'm not saying at all in the least that there's not a place for medication. I wasn't inferring that. I
Me
was not
too. Me too.
insinuating that.
Yeah.
I think that it's, the term overprescribed, I think, is where we're at right now with a lot of things. Overprescribed.
Yeah.
But there's absolutely a place for things. I love the approach of getting somebody to a point where they no longer need that prescription or wouldn't need it in the first place.
And there are so many physicians out there, like, so many members of PCRM, healthcare professionals that now have that approach and have that stance. And it's amazing to see physicians, trying to get people off medications, because really lifestyle factors or lifestyle interventions can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and I believe did you use the term deprescribe in your cookbook at any point? Or am I kind of making that up? I may be making that
I
up.
don't know if I use that. But
Okay.
I mean, it could work.
It very well may. It very well may. Because this was a powerful thing. So let's go back to your story, right? So you've gently Googled, you're learning more. I
Yep.
love that term, by the way, gently Googled. I hadn't heard
Gently
that one
Google,
before.
because I
Very
was
cool.
afraid. I was just like, I don't want to know too much. I didn't want to hear that there was nothing I could do, but it was
Yeah.
quite the
Oh yeah.
opposite. It was like, you can do lots of stuff.
Oh man, yeah, Google has a whole heap of information on there, does it not? So you're going from, these really easy to make frozen meals that you were talking about,
Yep.
proteins and things like that. And now you're going down this healthier hole, and so you're a foodie, but still I would imagine that would have required a little bit of a learning curve and
Oh,
an investment of time in your kitchen as well. So, how were you able to really ramp up the amount of time that you spent in the kitchen? Was that hard for you to learn that life balance as well?
it became my lifestyle very quickly. When I started, like I said to you, I woke up one morning and said, I'm plant based. So off the bat, it was like, okay, what can I have? Vegetables in a wrap. I can have a salad. I can have oatmeal. I can have vegetable soup. And there's lots of other things you can have, but I didn't have any experience in this. And then I would find a recipe here or there, and I'm like, oh, they didn't use oil in that muffin. Oh, they're using beans this way in this pasta dish. And I just got like, just this creative spark went off, and it became my favorite thing to do. It became creating the most delicious meals out of like whole foods. I would bring people food and be like, you'll never believe that there's no meat in this chili. You'll never believe that I put kale in this smoothie. And, this was in like 2011 when it seemed crazy, but I was just so motivated by how delicious healthy eating could be.
Do you think, just quick aside here, do you think it's easier to get somebody to eat a vegan dish if you don't even say, well, there's no meat in it? And you would just
Definitely.
call that chili like a 3 bean chili, right?
Correct.
Just destigmatize.
With my plant-based cookbooks, right? Plant-based, I had actually someone here in Taiwan, 'cause I'm in Taiwan. I don't know if we said that, but I live in Taipei, Taiwan. Um, Someone who had purchased my cookbook here had mentioned to me, why don't you not call your book plant-based something? Why don't you just call it like something? And I was like, you know what? I hear you, but the publishing gods wanted to have, the SEO and the name that attracts the audience, which I totally get. But I'm with you 100%. You do not need to present your vegan meal as being, oh, look, this is a vegan meal, especially today.
Oh yeah. Well, I think the title of the cookbook absolutely deserves to be plant-based, just as Plant-Based Delicious, which is coming
Yeah.
out June 13th, needs to have that in there. But for the individual who's making the recipes, maybe they just keep the fact that they got it tucked from
Yeah.
the plant-based cookbook for the time being, and then bust that out after the person's already and be
Afterwards.
like, yeah, see now, yeah, gift them
I
a
love
copy.
that.
That's what you should do. Make that chili and then gift them a copy to take home, right? Not leftovers. Give them the
That's a
cookbook.
great parting gift. Yeah.
And tell you what. Um, so how quickly after you make this transition to the more holistic route, did your symptoms that you are having, the side effects from the medication start to alleviate and you started to feel a little bit better?
Well, the side effects from the medication kind of kept on until I came off of them. But that was, I came off the medication 6 years after I started eating a plant-based diet. I felt better. I will have to say, oh my God, within probably 6 months, like immensely better. But it was a lot of things that I didn't think I'd feel that would matter, that would make a difference. I had less headaches. I had less bloating. I always had eczema. That went away. I always had weird sleeping patterns. That went away. I used to have these crazy energy dips mid-morning. That went away. So I don't know, all these things, I felt better in so many other ways as well. I would have to say I noticed a massive difference in my MS symptoms maybe 4 years later. But they weren't like I wasn't having major episodes this whole time. Actually, my MS has been very stable, was very stable that entire time. I used to have little symptoms that will grumble along. But after about 4 or 5 years, they kind of disappeared. And even now, the only time I really notice anything is when I am sleep deprived and I have a 1-year-old, so I'm feeling the sleep deprivation, or I'm having a lot of stress, because, stress is also very much related to inflammation as well.
Well, now I feel bad for keeping you up so late, given the time
No,
difference. I'm so
no,
sorry.
don't worry. We have my husband's getting up with my son tomorrow. I get to sleep in. It's all good.
Okay, fair enough. Fair
Yeah.
enough. You mentioned at one point you had eczema. I'm really surprised. Your skin looks absolutely radiant to me.
Thank
I'm like
you.
really surprised to hear that. That's one of the like nice little side benefits that comes with this, huh?
And acne.
And acne.
Also acne.
Did you
All of that went away.
I mean, I've got you full screen right now for those who are watching on YouTube and Facebook, and I'm telling you, it's just
Like, I'm
radiant.
blushing.
It's unbelievable. Uh,
That is so kind. Thank you.
very cool. Okay, so how are you feeling today? I mean, obviously you're looking great, but you said like a little bit of sleep deprivation. But here, I mean, just basically, it seems like you're doing great today.
I'm doing great. I want to
Yeah.
knock on wood always, because you never know with a condition like MS what's going to happen tomorrow. It's taught me a lot of things about presence, mindfulness, accepting what is, but I'm doing fabulous.
And have other members of your family kind of taken notice of the route that you've
Yeah.
decided to take?
My sister made dramatic changes. She's predominantly plant-based as well. My mom is predominantly plant-based. My dad did for a little bit, but he is very traditional meat and
Mm.
potatoes kind of guy. But like one of your guests had said in a previous podcast, meat and potatoes, you're halfway there, right? He's eating
Mike
the
Kaplan,
potatoes.
the comedian,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, it made a huge difference. And whenever we have gatherings now for holiday meals, when we get together on Sundays at my parents' house, which is what we do all the time. I live in Taiwan now, so not as much, but there will always be a plant-based option, a vegan gravy, a vegan dish, vegetables that are cooked without any oil or without being cooked with meat. And that goes from my side of the family and my husband's side of the family and all of our in-laws. Everybody just, cooks plant-based now. My sister-in-law is like, she is one of my best testers. So I have recipe testers. Whenever I'm writing a book, I have, a key group of recipe testers, and we go back and forth for months and months to nail a recipe. And my sister-in-law, who has no health history like this at all, has just like dived completely in, and she is like a plant-based chef in her own right now. So yeah, it's spread a lot, and with my friends, and it's just amazing to see. Yeah.
How in the world did you do that? Because Ashley, I'm telling you, I hear from so many exam roomies who say, well, look, even though I've lost 100 pounds and I've been able to, really improve my health in so many areas, the
Mm.
rest of my family still just is not getting on board. And in some cases, are still giving them guff. What, in your estimation, is kind of the key to getting everybody to get on that path? I think for a lot of people, they would love to be able to crack that code.
I would first have to give credit to my family, I think, because they were so supportive of whatever I wanted to do or needed to do to take care of myself. But secondly, and I think this is key for a lot of people who are trying to get family members and friends to accept or try vegan or plant-based recipes, is that I would always bring what I was eating to everything. I would go out of my way. I would make a vegan cheesecake with no coconut oil. I would make the vegan gravy. I would make the dish. And like over the years, it didn't happen overnight, but over the years, everybody would kind of try it. And then as people encountered other health issues themselves, the idea of eating better, less inflammatory foods, less fat, less cholesterol was kind of becoming something that everybody wanted to do. And I was like, hey, we're kind of already doing this. And that's kind of how it spread. So I think that it's very difficult to get people to jump on board because you want them to. I think it's something they have to come to themselves, which I know can be very difficult if you are a busy parent and you're trying to make a meal for yourself and then for your kids and then for your spouse because they don't want to eat what you're eating. And in that case, simplicity comes into play for sure. But I think that being consistent and consistently offering things that taste good is the best place to start. And that's what I did. And that's what I still do. And even today, I love having dinner parties. And whenever people come to our house for our dinner party, and they're from all over the world. I live in Taiwan. My friends are from Europe, United States, like just everywhere, Asia. We make 100% plant-based food for everybody. Starter, main, dessert, snacks, charcuterie board, everything is vegan. And everybody leaves here like, oh my God, I can't believe there was no cheese in that. What is that? What did you put in that thing? And I get so high off that. I'm like, oh my God, let me tell you what's in it. So I think by feeding people, sorry, that was a long way to say, by feeding people.
No, I think that there's something to it, right? Because I think especially if somebody's just getting going and they're trying to feel things out themselves, it's like going to an event or hosting an event even, like it can be awkward because you just don't know what to
Yeah.
bring or what to serve. So I think, maybe the noob mistake is just rolling up with a vegetable tray or a bag of,
Yeah.
prepackaged salad or something and you're like,
Oh
no, no, no,
yeah.
no, 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 no. We're not
That's
having
so
any of
like
that.
1999, right? Yeah.
Right. I'm bringing friggin' cheesecake, y'all, and
Yeah.
everybody's going to get in on this and y'all are going to see. And that's
I
the key.
It is. And I will also just add that doing this with recipes that are familiar is key. Mac and
Mm.
cheese. You don't have to tell them the sauce is made of carrots, cashews, and potatoes or whatever. Spaghetti, chocolate, like mousse pie. That's like one of the first recipes I ever made. I just remember that one particularly. A cheese ball. There's a cheese ball in my first book, and that literally is something that I made and served at a Christmas party and didn't tell anybody it was vegan. And everybody was like, can I get the recipe? And I was like, sure, here it is. And it's, cheese free.
Hello. Merry
Yeah.
Christmas to one and all. And surprise. I'm going to ask you about one of the mac and cheese recipes that's in your first cookbook as well. The hummus mac and cheese, the one pot.
Yeah.
I think that is just magic. Let's talk about though, when you decide, all right, well, let's leave the pharmacy behind and let's
Mhm.
step into the kitchen full time. So you are now a properly trained, credentialed chef. What was that experience like for you? Because I know that you are trained up with one of my colleagues, the vegan roadie, Dustin Harder.
Yeah. Yeah, I am. Oh my God, I love Dustin.
He's the
It
man.
was, I have to say, the best experience of my entire life. It was, I felt like I was coming home. I'm going to add in here because I had this conversation yesterday with someone, and it's eluding me who it was because I've been doing a lot of media stuff for my book. But when I was 19, my first year in college and university, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I went to the career counselor and we did all these tests, Myers-Briggs. I filled out all these forms. He took it, did all the computing calculations. And then my next appointment was to come back and talk about it. My number one match was the culinary arts.
Wow.
And at that point, I was like, I'm not going to become a chef. I was, again, very academically driven and I was gifted in that area. So, the rest is history. I pursued pharmacy. But it was wild when I was 29, 30, sitting in my first day of culinary school. The smile was just, I loved everything about it. I felt like it was exactly where I needed to be. And I have to also point out that Dustin, the vegan roadie, and I sat next to each other that first day. And we've been best buds ever since. I know.
Love me some Dustin Harder. I love that. And so that's just kind of fate, like to have that kind of
Yeah.
support with you too. Cause he loves this as much as you two. Like y'all are fired up for this stuff. And I think that when you
Yeah.
have that buddy relationship and that enthusiasm just builds between the two of you, like that gets you even more excited about the path
Very
that
much.
you're on. Right. And clearly that has stayed with you to this day.
Yeah, it has. And culinary school, I talk about it in the book as well, my first book. It wasn't easy in that I arrived at culinary school already knowing I wanted to go there and become a culinary professional. I wanted to learn how to properly handle produce. I wanted to learn about the different cooking methods. I wanted to learn about good ingredients and different spices and how to pair flavors. But I also went in there on a plant-based diet. I was like, I don't eat added oil. I don't eat meat. I don't eat cheese. I don't eat fish. And it was a mostly plant-based culinary school, but we fried stuff. We used lots of oils. Sometimes they would add dairy to things or milk. There was a chicken and fish section. So I went in there having to really be confident and almost firm in what I was there for. And I would often ask, our culinary instructors, who were brilliant, if I could do things differently. And they were very accommodating that way.
Very cool. So how long was the training that you went through?
Because you're not doing, again, like you're not handling meat at all. It's a lot shorter. So it was, I think, a year, 8 months in school, and then you do your internship.
All right. And so what was the plan? I mean, were you thinking you were going to open up a restaurant? What did you want to do initially?
I had no idea. And I went into this, but also I got married right before I left. I lived in Newfoundland. I got married and then left to go to culinary school in New York. And my husband was like, okay, see you later. But he was so supportive. And right before I left, I had this moment where I kind of freaked out. And I was like, what am I doing? What am I going to do with this? Like, am I crazy? And he was like, the worst case scenario is that you're going to be able to cook really good food for us. And so I was like, yes, okay, right? That's it. So I didn't really know. But as I went through culinary school, things became a lot clearer for me. And I knew that I had to teach. And when culinary school was over, I knew that my approach was different. And I knew I had to write a cookbook. And then that was my mission, to write a cookbook for those next few years.
And you did, and now you're a holistic nutritionist and just a
Yeah.
mover and a shaker in the plant-based community. When you make a magical meal for somebody and you put everything on the plate and it looks so delicious, do you look at it not just as this meal is going to be fantastic, but do you look at it in all of the different ways it's also going to nourish that person's body?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's always at the forefront of my mind. When I'm creating a recipe, I'm thinking about how it's going to improve my health. I'm thinking about what it's going to offer me. And I really try not to compromise on that. I really try and think, okay, this has got to be super healthy and it's going to be super delicious. And that's what my job is, really, to make it super healthy and super delicious. And that's where my work is.
And so if somebody has a recipe that they've loved, it's like a family type, just passed down through the generations, but it
Yeah.
does call for the oil or beef or chicken or something like that. When you're working with somebody, do you really kind of hold them by the hand and guide them through how they may be able to take that out of the recipe and still retain all of the flavor that they've loved?
Definitely. It really depends on the recipe. For example, there are some things that are really hard to replicate, like baklava. I had this conversation last weekend. I was having dinner with some friends, and one of them ordered baklava for their dessert. And for anybody who knows, that's like a Greek dessert, and it's just phyllo pastry layered with like so much butter that like it's just unreal. It's just butter and phyllo pastry. And I was like, you know what? That's one that would be difficult to replicate. But then if I can't substitute something, so if someone comes to me with something that's predominantly meat, okay, I'm like, all right, what can we substitute? Tofu, tempeh, can we use beans? How's this going to work? And then we can build it from there. And then sometimes if you can't exactly replicate the recipe, you think, okay, what are the predominant flavors here? What do we love about this? Is it the texture? Is it how saucy this is? Is it that it's a pasta? And then you kind of take those elements and then I try to recreate it kind of in remembrance of that first version. But a lot of the time, you can make a version that's plant-based.
All right, really quickly before I ask you about some specific recipes in the books. One, as a pharmacist and as a holistic nutritionist, trained chef, just all around extraordinary person.
Oh my God,
When
you're
you're
amazing.
talking about some of the healthiest spices, this has come up a lot recently on the show.
Yeah.
If you're going to prescribe a spice to somebody who's really looking to reduce that inflammation in their body and boost their health, take it to the next level, what are some of the spices you might recommend?
That's a great question because I think a lot of people actually overlook the power of spices. So that's a wonderful question. The first thing that I think of always is turmeric, to get that curcumin, which is essentially the nutrient or the compound in turmeric that has all this anti-inflammatory power. And there's so many studies now done about turmeric and curcumin and how it can reduce inflammation, and it's related to arthritis and pain. It's just amazing. So I think turmeric. When I think turmeric, I think black pepper, because we need black pepper to help with the absorption of turmeric and help it, not the absorption, the activation of the curcumin in the turmeric. So I think of those two things. And I use turmeric and black pepper in so many things, especially when I'm feeding my son. Not a lot of black pepper, not so that it's like spicy on the tongue, but just like a little bit. So I think turmeric, I think black pepper, I think fresh ginger, which is easy to access and it's so cheap. I throw fresh ginger into smoothies. I'll grate some on some greens. The other night, I just chopped up a ton of bok choy and grated some ginger on it and just sauteed it with water and added a little tiny bit of salt, and it was delicious. I also think garlic. Garlic is also one of those foods that's just amazing for you. And I think it's overlooked again sometimes because it's so predominant in the culinary arts. We start with onions, garlic, and we just forget, but garlic is a real powerhouse. I would say that there are also whole spices. So this is something that might be intimidating to people, but whole spices offer so much nutrition as well, and they're very easy to cook with. So I think cumin, coriander, fennel seed, I use those a lot in my dishes as well. And you'll notice that a theme throughout all of this is a lot of this is like Indian flavors and spices that are used a lot in Indian cooking. And they're, it's really healthy food and it's really healthy spices. I think also cinnamon. Cinnamon also has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties, and it's really important to add a little bit to your oatmeal or to your smoothie or to a baked good. It also has a lot of potential in what it can do for you. I think that's probably like my handful. That's what I think off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's a pretty comprehensive list. Dr. Will Bolsowitz turned me on to turmeric, and I've been sprinkling that in my coffee a little bit. And the flavor complements it quite nicely. I was really
I have never
surprised.
done that. So, okay, because I've done some pretty crazy things with turmeric, but I've never put it in my coffee. But you bet tomorrow morning I'm going to try this.
I'm telling you, don't fear it. Don't go heavy on it. Just
Just a
a
little bit.
little sprinkle. And I'm telling you, like, it really complements it. I call it my golden cup of coffee. It's
Oh,
actually
do you,
quite good.
you
Quite
know
good.
what my secret with turmeric is?
What's that?
Put a little bit on popcorn with nutritional yeast and black pepper. It is
Mm,
amazing.
mm.
Amazing. Yeah.
My wife loves popcorn. I might have to try that. I might have
Ooh,
to
I
make
should
that
meet
for
her.
her.
I also love popcorn.
All right. I'll put you two together. You'll be besties in no time. One of the spices that you mentioned was ginger. Obviously, you're living
Yeah.
over in Taiwan. I know that ginger is a big time spice in a lot of Asian cooking. Is it the same in Taiwan?
Oh my God, yes. And there's different versions of it. Living here has opened up my repertoire of like whole foods for sure. For example, greens. There's greens here that I had never even heard about. They're affordable and they are widely available. So I experiment a lot with those. Also, mushrooms. Mushrooms here, the variety is amazing, and mushrooms are so good for you and also are so good at fighting all of these chronic diseases that we know to be so common now in the modern world. So getting to like play around with what's available that way has been amazing. And not just ginger, I would have to say there's other things here that are really available that weren't so available when I lived in Canada. So things like lemongrass, just different things that build a lot of flavor that also have a lot of nutrition.
Do you love being able to build upon your culinary base and like learn about all of these new foods wherever it is that your travels take you in the world and just kind of expand your culinary repertoire?
So much. Sometimes I feel so full of ideas that it's like overwhelming. I feel like I need to slow down a little bit. But I lived so after culinary school, my husband and I moved to the Netherlands for 2 years. So we lived there for 2 years before we moved to Taiwan. So I also had some experience there with different food. And that's in that very short period of time influenced the way I saw how whole foods could be used. And then I brought that with me. And then when I came here, I kind of just take a little bit of this with me. I feel like whenever we leave Taiwan, we're not going to be here forever, but I feel like when I leave here, I'm going to miss a lot of the fresh local produce and realize how much I use it.
Well, I think, that's why vacations are made. You can
Yeah.
always go back and reignite the old culinary skills in Taiwan, sharpen those things right back up over time. By the way, I'm going to Toronto this weekend. So this will have already happened once this episode airs. So I will have been to Toronto. But any suggestions you have as far as places I might want to eat, if you're familiar with that area, I would be all ears.
Yes, I will send you an email. I will send you
Love
an
it.
email. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. There's a
Awesome.
lot of good stuff happening in Toronto. Yeah.
I love to hear that.
Yeah.
So 3 recipes I need to ask you about. I need to, not
Oh,
want
great.
to, need to ask you about
Awesome.
before we wrap up today. First one comes from the original cookbook that you have.
Yeah.
Again, the new one drops on June 13th. This is the plant-based cookbook, available now. There's a link to it in the show description and in the episode notes. Also, a link to pre-order your copy of Plant-Based Delicious, which again drops in June. First one I need to ask you about is one that we referenced earlier, the one pot creamy hummus mac and cheese. So
Yeah.
you're kind of marrying hummus with mac and cheese.
Yeah.
Where did you get this idea? This seems kind of wild.
We are hummus lovers in this house.
You're good
I
people.
can take a bowl of hummus and turn it into 10 different meals. Um, and this actually came about serendipitously. It was many of the recipes in my books are planned. I think really hard about how to combine the ingredients and like what will taste the best, but also what offers the best nutrition. This one came about just like, I'm making pasta. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to turn hummus into this. Like, why not? It's thick. I can make it creamy. It's got that garlic flavor. I'm going to do this and see how it works out. And we did it. And I was like, this is amazing. And then I just threw some broccoli in there so that we could get that cruciferous, get that green component. And it just became something that I made often, every other week. And so I was like, it has to go in the cookbook.
Game on. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Those serendipitous recipes, man. Sometimes they just turn out to be the absolute best.
Yep.
Also in this house, my father-in-law lives with us. My wife and they just share a sweet tooth like you wouldn't believe. I mean, any pastry, I'm not sure that they don't like. And so then I see these decadent no-bake cinnamon rolls that were also in the original book. Talk to me about these decadent no-bake cinnamon rolls, and I will preface this question also by saying my culinary skills not nearly anywhere close to yours. So, I mean, is this something that
It's,
anybody can do?
man, I got to tell you, Chuck, this is one of my most like proudest accomplishments in this book. I set out to make, which kind of circles back to the question you asked earlier. If there's something that you can't make exactly a plant-based replica of, how do you approach it? This is what I felt. This is how I felt about cinnamon rolls. I was like, well, making a gluten-free, a non-white flour laden dough into a cinnamon, it's just not going to work. And I thought, like, how can I make this into a dessert? And it just occurred to me, I was like, okay, maybe I can make like a raw dough out of like dates and walnuts and almonds. And then I'll make the cinnamon part on the inside, just like cranberries and raisins and almond butter. And I was like, I think that'll work, and a lot of cinnamon. And so I whipped up the 2 components, and I was like, okay, how am I going to make this into a cinnamon roll? And I just kind of like worked on it. And from the very first shot, I was like, oh my God, this is so easy. So that is, you do need a food processor. But, besides that, it's like mixing the dough, taking it out, mixing the filling, taking it out, and you roll out the dough into a square. You put on the filling, roll it up, and it's done.
I love it.
We have a hard time keeping these in our house. So they don't hang around very often. We also, I have a sweet tooth. I love sweet things. So for me, it's always been very important to create healthier versions with less sugar or no sugar. And this one in particular is one that I just love to pull out of the freezer because it has that texture where you can just bite into it when it's still cold, and it's so delicious. And I'm so glad you asked me about that. No one has asked me about that recipe. That is probably my favorite dessert recipe in that whole chapter.
Nobody has asked you about that? I find that hard to
Nobody's
believe.
no one's asked me about like making it. I've had a couple of people say it was like delicious, actually, and people writing reviews and stuff about it, but no one's ever been like, where did that come from? Because it was something that I thought about very like strategically. I was like, I'm going to make this. How am I going to make this happen? And I think sometimes, and I want to say this to all the home chefs out there, the people who are trying different things on their own. I go through a lot of iterations before sometimes something sticks. Like I make a lot of stuff that kind of sucks. If I'm trying to make something, new, if I'm trying to create a new way of doing something, which in plant-based delicious, I did a bunch. I also made it during the pandemic, so I had a lot of time stuck inside my house pregnant. So I had a lot of time to recipe test. But it's okay if you make something and it doesn't work out the first time. Like it's totally okay. I think knowing that and remembering to just like kind of let it, just be like, it's just food. I mean, I think food is so important, but when it comes to making things and being stressed about it, like it's okay. It's just food. You can try again. So for anybody who opens a cookbook and is like, oh, I don't know how to make any of this stuff. Like it's always a process. And the first time you make something that's new and different to you, it's like, that's it. You know it. The next time it'll be like, oh, I know how to do that.
I love your honesty. Honest to goodness, I'm
Yeah.
just like straight up infatuated with your honesty. I make a lot of stuff and it completely sucks.
Yep.
Words never spoken on this show before. God bless you for being real. Because
I have
look,
to be honest about it.
it's so important because people think like, well, why can't I do this on the first crack? And then they just throw their hands up because they'll never be able to do it if they can't do it right the first time. Trial and error. There's
Yeah.
no problem with that. That's
Especially in
perfectly natural.
this especially in this realm that we're in, in this arena, in plant-based culinary arts, because I do come from it. And like I said, I love the culinary arts. Innovation is part of what we're doing, right? We're learning how to make, in plant-based delicious, I make cookie batter out of beans, and we're learning how to use nuts to make sauces, and we're pureeing vegetables to make fillings, and we're making lasagnas out of different things. So there's so much innovation involved. I mean, that's why I think the plant-based culinary world is just like one of the most valuable. We do the craziest stuff with food. I don't think it gets enough attention that way. We do crazy stuff with chia seeds, and we turn flax seeds into stuff. And it's just amazing. So we have to remember that with innovation comes trial and error, and not so much failure, but just, okay, that didn't work. How am I going to approach it next time? Which I go through a lot.
Oh yeah. The plant-based chefs are mad scientists who are
Yeah.
using their power for good. That's the way that I really
Love
like to
that.
look at it. Final recipe. You talk
Yeah.
about marrying flavors and doing crazy things. I haven't even had a chance to taste this yet. It's in your new book, Plant-Based Delicious, brown rice poutine with miso gravy. What is happening here? Talk to me. Oh my God.
Oh, right. Oh, God. I love that recipe. We love that recipe. So that was me marrying, because every chef brings themselves to their recipes and their cookbooks. And I do that especially. Everything that I make usually has a story. This one has a very prominent story. So I live in Taiwan, which is Asia. I'm from Canada. Canada's signature dish is poutine. Poutine is fries with gravy and cheese curds. It sounds, if you've never heard of it before, it sounds odd, but it's very popular. And I have to say, from my previous life, it is delicious. In Asia, rice is a staple food. Rice is in everything. And miso, which is a soy product, but it's a fermented soybean. It's excellent for the microbiome. It's wonderful to add to your diet for decreasing inflammation as well. So that's also prominent in my diet here. So I was like, I'm going to make my gravy out of miso instead of using cheese curds. We're going to batter tofu, and we're going to bake it so it kind of looks the same. And we're going to put all that on brown rice, and we're going to toss it with fresh vegetables to give it that Asian crunch. We have like the julienne carrots and cucumbers, and then there's some greens mixed in there as well. Just again, I'm a big proponent of greens in most of my meals, so I added that in there as well. So that's a really, really great recipe, and we make it a lot. I'm so glad you picked that one to ask about.
Oh, I'm on board. I'm on board. So, like when I saw poutine, it just jumped out at me because, again, going to Toronto here, I've always wanted to go to a Toronto Blue Jays baseball game because as a young kid, I remember seeing
Yeah.
my team, the New York Mets, playing there, and the announcers were talking about this thing that the fans in the stands were eating, which was French fries and gravy.
Yeah.
Poutine. And so
Poutine.
I saw this, and I'm going to a Jays game Friday night. Like I'm missing out on another event there just so I can go and like
Oh
check
my
this off of
God.
my bucket list. Like I'm so
My
excited.
husband doesn't miss a Jays game, by
Oh,
the
is that
way,
right?
even over here. So he's going to be jealous. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Well, if they have vegan poutine, I will definitely let you know. I'm not sure that they
I'm
do.
not sure if that's going to happen.
Um, but yeah, so like I'm super excited about that. But like just to know that again, you're able to take something that is typically unhealthy and then make it healthy and put your own culinary twist on it, I just think is so amazing to me.
Oh, thank you
That's
so
why
much.
I love this recipe, the idea behind it. I really do. I love what you're doing. I'm a huge fan of yours. And it's a shame that it took so long to get you on the show. But right now, today, I'm telling you, you
I'm
have a
so happy to be
standing
here.
invitation. Come on back anytime.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I've loved chatting with you. And same here. I mean, I've been aware, I just lost an earbud. I've been aware of, PCRM, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine forever. I've listened to your podcast. I know all about you. So it also almost feels like, I've known about you for a long time and I'm finally getting to, talk to you face to face. So it's really exciting for me as well.
Just a couple of old friends,
Yeah.
but a new cookbook coming out, Plant-Based Delicious, June 13th. Click that link down below in the show description, or if you're listening to the pod, in the episode notes. Ashley Madden, thank you so very much for being here. This has just been a real slice of heaven.
Oh, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
If your health IQ is a couple of points higher than it was a few minutes ago, go ahead and like this video or subscribe to the YouTube channel. And to take it even higher, head over to Apple Podcast or wherever you get your favorite shows. Look for The Exam Room by the Physicians Committee. Hit the subscribe button there as well and help to make your world a healthier place.